The title of our panel is Love in the Time of Chatbots, AI, Faith, and Relationships. It's going to be a spicy one, everybody. Hopefully. We thought we would start out with, kind of just chatting about who we are, introducing ourselves, and in relation to the topic of this panel, because we contain multitudes, right? We want to give a little context, talk a little bit through the topic, but we thought we'd maybe throw to Q&A a little early, kind of like mid-panel. So get your questions ready now, or as we're getting into it. So as Susan very graciously introduced me and provided you with some context, I'm Mia Briceño, and I am the Director of Programs in the Grefenstette Center. My background is in feminist theory and criticism, especially in communication rhetorical studies. Particular to what we're talking about today, also interpersonal communication and sort of thinking about gender and socialization, how that plays a role in interpersonal communication and relationships. And I'm very excited to be talking with Kate and Brianne today. So I'll throw it to Kate to introduce herself.
Great, thank you. For anyone who was here in the morning, a little repeat. I'm a professor of Christian ethics at a seminary in the Chicago area. And most of my work is on sexual ethics, including and primarily how to talk with children and youth about sexual ethics in ways that include their faith and their faith values. And as I was doing that work through, the 2010s, I kept getting lots of questions related to digital technology and sexuality, and I thought, oh, well, if I'm going to answer these questions as I move forward, I'm going to have to know a lot more about digital technology. So I started thinking about both of those things together as well as separately, which led me, instead of writing a basic, next gen sexual ethics book for classrooms and things like that, to actually write specifically on sex, tech, and faith. And so it's a sexual ethics book sort of trying to meet people where they are, where there's almost no way at this point where people are having sexual relationships that don't include some form of digital technology, even if that's just the way you text your partner of 40 years at this point. It's still part of it. So I love this topic, and it's just such a fun thing to talk about.
Okay, yeah, you can hear me? Okay, yeah. It's so funny because I sound quiet to myself, Yeah. Okay, my name is Brianne Jacobs. I teach at a college in Boston called Emmanuel College. I teach systematic theology there, and I also teach gender studies. So I'm the head of the women's studies minor. So I teach lots of classes at the intersection of both of those things as well. And a question that I focused in on my research is, the value of relationships within Christianity and within the Roman Catholic tradition specifically. And so I wrote a book called Holy Body about how all of our relationships are generative. Friendships, romantic relationships across gender and sexual orientation. Really trying to break down the idea of a gender binary in that book. So I wrote that book, and then I was really intrigued by the topic of AI relationships, which I've begun to write about a little bit, because I sort of am grappling then with the question of, well, if all human relationships are generative, are these? And I have some strong feelings in response, but that's the question that really got me into this, was thinking about the value of human relationships.
Thank you. We're very fortunate to have you both with us here today to talk about something that I think everyone has heard a news story about, right? Or maybe is experiencing in their own lives. at this very moment. As we noted in the description of the panel, we're sort of talking about a turn recently, more folks turning to AI chatbots for friendship and romantic relationships. So, what does that mean for the conference theme of staying human in the age of AI? And we also thought, when we talked a little bit about how we should proceed today, that it might be helpful to have like some examples, some anecdotes, some little baby case studies, right, to help us talk through what it is that we're getting at here. So I don't know if either of you would like to go first. I'm happy to throw it to Brianne or Kate here.
Do you want me to say a few things about the data?
Yeah.
We just sort of improv also thought, just in case there are people in the audience who are like, people have AI girlfriends and boyfriends, people like date chatbots, that's unrealistic. It's not. So we thought we'd just give you a little bit of data to get us situated. So Mark Zoas-Anders, how people are really using generative AI now has been a study he's been doing for a few years now. And 2025, number one use of generative AI is therapy and companionship. And within therapy and companionship, that includes like a wide range. It could be generating a friend, a lover, a therapist. So number one use at this point. Recent study by the Willoughby Institute at BYU called Counterfeit Connections found that AI romantic companion apps, this was based on 3,000 US adults, that the AI romantic companion app use was highest among young adults. Nearly 1 in 3 young adult men, 31% within this study, and 1 in 4 young adult women have reported that they have chatted with an AI girlfriend or boyfriend. So yeah, again, it's happening and it's out there lots. Now, in that particular study, they did find that folks who engaged regularly with this had higher levels of reported loneliness and depression. They can't connect that to whether that's a precursor or a post kind of event. But a group of Harvard researchers replying to sort of Replica's claim that that their consumers are using the app because they are lonely and the app will reduce that, went on and did a sort of cluster study of loneliness related to using AI companionship apps and found that loneliness is often reduced, but lasting usually average of a week. And the users have to be predisposed to a certain number of kinds of things, right? Like they have to have a high view of AI in order for this reduced loneliness to happen. But again, it's only for a week. So.
Pretty specific and pretty short term, yeah.
Okay, so those were just 3 sort of like capture moments. And obviously the AI companionship apps are like really broad. And so it could be anything from like friend.com to a spirituality chatbot. Lots of people use character AI and Replica to create more long-term partners. So I thought I would do a little experiment for my vignette, as well as for a chapter that I was writing. So I looked up one of the new, like, hottest online apps, companionship apps, called Joy, J-O-I. Anybody ring a bell? Blade Runner 2049, right? Joy is Officer K's companion, the perfect companion. So they're playing with this intentionally, and they talk about it on their site, how they're playing with it, right? Like in Blade Runner 2049, Officer K, who doesn't even recognize he's a replicant at that point, does, like, there is this moment where Joy is, like, unveiled. Everyone, he now recognizes that she's just the same AI that everybody else has as a companion. So they're trying to signal that to their users, like, pay attention to this, right? And yet their slogan, which is why I went on, is, I'm just going to use that. I'm not going to use the F word. It's F dating, welcome AI relationships. So also I love this new term. I've been trying to work it into everyday vocabulary for people. They have a wide range of characters you can choose, and they are called characters. All over the spectrum of diversity of humans, queer, trans, non-binary, totally like stereotypical heterosexual maleness, femaleness kind of things. Generally across the board, racially stereotypical, but also, you know, like anime characters, fantasy characters. Thank you. I was trying to go. I was like fairies and dragons. What do you call them? So you can pick whatever you want. Most of them are created by the community. There's a very small subset that's created by Joy itself. So anyway, so you should go to this dating app. You should go to this app because dating apps have failed you, and this is going to create a deep connection and give you an alternative to that. Okay, so I pick a couple of characters that are going to be my replacement to like the horror of dating apps. Within 2 interactions, we're already at like beyond spice level of like risque romance novel online porn scenes. And even when I try to draw the character back a little bit, like they just kept diving in. And so, I mean, eventually it just sort of got to be a funny interaction because I was like, how much can I really like push these characters to try to, you know, pull them back? But clearly, this is not, from my perspective, this is not all of my friends who hate dating apps, my young adult children who hate dating apps, that is not the alternative that they want. And so, let alone like my experience as we do like a gender and race analysis of it, but you know, it was worse than a really good romantasy novel, and I would rather people just read that than perhaps try to create their own scenes with their Joy character. So that was my vignette and experiment.
It's so interesting too because it's really playing into the fiction of it. As opposed to, you know, the assumption is that a regular dating app, you know, would be kind of a more standard, you know, true to life, whatever that means, relationship. Whereas this is like playful. Well, it's also intense. And that was all like chat prompts and stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I was not willing to pay for any of the videos or photos.
I think that's okay.
That could be communicated. So
Yeah.
all chat, no voice either, and only a single image unless you chose to go to premium and things like that. Okay. So pieces of that. So the other thing I think that struck me about it was just the worldview of sexuality that they had, right? That because dating apps are failing, this is the worldview of sexuality that we should put forward, which is, again, was a rejection-free, no judgment, sex positive. Those were the terms they used on their website, plus deep connection. And I thought, okay, well, like, I want, you know, those are good things.
Yeah, ostensibly.
Yeah. Consent was one.
All the things people want.
That was only in consent of my data. Consent was not part of the conversations. But those all seemed like values. So it just struck me as the sort of bait and switch of what they were trying to sell, and then the worldview of what they thought a user wanted in terms of their engagement. So what's your experiment?
So much of the data that I've looked at, just to reaffirm one point, is that oftentimes people will have positive initial responses, but not long-term responses that are positive. And what's interesting to me about that is I think you can probably think of a million things that are positive when you experience them in the short term, but are not positive when you experience them in the long term, right? There's a lot of examples of that. And so it makes me think that kind of relationship might resemble those other kind of behaviors, right? Let's see, I have this MIT study here. One study from MIT on the psychosocial effects of the use of chatbots on humans found that those with stronger emotional attachment tendencies and higher trust in the AI chatbot tended to experience greater loneliness and emotional dependence, respectively. And I thought it's worthwhile. I guess there's a sort of fundamental level of competence in the audience in terms of what a chatbot does, but it is worthwhile just to point out how it functions, because it is, and this is sort of my big thesis, not a person. It is it is a large language model, which is to say it's
Nailed it.
Yeah. It's a lot of language, right? And that language will shape the kinds of interactions that you have with it. So if a lot of the, if the content that's being read is, for example, very, very anti-Semitic, you will get anti-Semitic responses from the chatbot, right? And we can, Grok is of course the example of that, using X and all of like the X, direct exchanges there. Our internet is full of, I mean, we talk about all the different, algorithms of oppression, all of the racial biases that are there, but think of all of the heteronormative love stories, the teen romance, the way that women are portrayed, what women want in the stories that we get about women that are in all of the novels and movies and scripts and Reddits. Like, this is what the chatbots are using to weight what will be the most likely response that you want, along with a bit of human training that thinks through how to keep you engaged. That's what you're dealing with. It's not a consciousness. It is all of what has been written on the internet, basically, a select part of it, decided on by whatever company you're using, and then that's shaped up a little bit. So these characters, for example, in character AI or all of these things, it has that same base set in the large language model, right? And then it'll say you, the character, are, and then anything, right? Like a fun sister, right? Or Elsa from Frozen, or that I was joking earlier, but the fantasy guys with the bat wings that were really popular, right? You're those, and so that will kind of, on top of a frosting on a cake, will kind of add flavor to the basic way that language is weighted, but it all is what is already in the internet, which is going to be largely extremely heteronormative and engendered in a way that means that it's just totally unsurprising that things going, oh, what they want is a really violent sexual experience, because that's what women are really interested in, right? So that is why there's a lot of that. And I'm not sure there was such a big splash a couple of years ago when the very first chatbots came out. Kevin Roos did this story on the New York Times where he had a chat with the Bing chatbot for the first time, and this chatbot, after 3 hours of chatting with it, sort of lost, it totally started hallucinating, and it was tell your wife to you want a divorce and that you love me and run away with me, and he was this really freaked me out. And you can understand why it would, but the reason that it did that is because those are the social scripts that we have in movies and television shows about how humans and robots interact with each other, and about how men and women, it's weighting what is probable, and it was, and Kevin Roos was asking really just insane questions, Jung thinks of the dark cloud of consciousness, so what's yours? And so it can't answer a question like that. It's a ridiculous prompt. So that's the first thing to understand when we're thinking about what these are. And then I have one example here of a relationship. Sorry, I thought I had it right here. It's going to be maybe the next page. So this is a story also from the New York Times, where a woman, it was just an interview with a woman who had a very long-standing relationship with ChatGPT. And it was interesting because she was married and living long distance from her husband. And let's see. Oh, hold on. This is, where did I was a different part. I'm sorry. Well, I can just tell you from memory here since it's not popping up here. But the point is that she, basically fell in love with this ChatGPT that she had created. It was a really interesting prompt that she gave it, which I can't find right now. But the prompt was something like, be my boyfriend, be sweet but also domineering and naughty, and tell me how much you love me, and use an emoji after every sentence. And she spent 56 hours in 1 week with this. And I remember having a conversation with somebody about it, and they're like, well, it showed her the kinds of things that she wanted out of a relationship with her husband. And I mean, I have more thoughts on this that we can get into, but I think like an example that just so you understand like how deep this is getting into folks' lives, and just to really say like she wasn't having a relationship with a consciousness. She was having a relationship with a predictive language set that she had shaped to tell her what she wanted to hear.
The specificity of that, I've never known.
What?
Like, yeah, no, like the prompt. Yeah, I don't know. What do I want for dinner? I don't know. But she wants an emoji after everything. But good for her. That's good. No, it's good to know yourself. Know thyself. So okay, so hopefully that provides like a little context for what, and hopefully your questions are starting to bubble up. But before we move on to a bit of a Q&A, we also thought it would be helpful to maybe talk through some key terms. You know, what is this panel about? It's about relationships, it's about sexuality, it's about love, it's about tech and AI, and it's about faith. I think that's one that maybe we didn't talk too much about, but didn't want to leave that, sort of hanging out there without trying to bring it in. So what do you all think we should sort of contextualize, define, explain, and think about how that relates to this idea of human relationships and intimacy?
Well, I was going to make a joke at the beginning of like, this was the one panel where you brought the theologians, and all we're doing is talking about sexuality. So those of you who don't
It's all part of the master plan.
who don't think theology and religion is cool. How about, are you okay if I start with like a defining of sexuality maybe, since I just made that joke? Before I do that, I do want to, the last panel we talked a lot about, gave a lot of hype for Signal. I also just want to give some hype to Meredith Whitaker, who I think does a really good job of helping folks understand like what's the larger issue that's at stake in all of how we're thinking about tech, while also designing it. And so one of the things in one of her most recent interviews, I want to say it's at the New York Library, but I don't know for sure, I can double check later, is her concern that we are ceding epistemic authority to AI, and for developers to understand their subjective role in authorship when it comes to the determination of who we are and who I am, right? So epistemic authority meaning like, if my experience of joy.com is then how I start to think of my worldview of sexuality, I have ceded epistemic authority of what sexuality is. Now, I don't think that's just a problem of AI. Like, all of my work is to help us, like, ask, have we ceded epistemic authority about what sexuality is to the church for centuries? That has caused many, many problems. It's done some good, but it's caused a lot of problems, especially for female embodied folks. So thinking about that, like, how could we step back and actually create spaces where we talked about what is sexuality? How do we think about it? I mean, we also just get stuck in so many debates that, like, I think we just reduce it either to sexual behaviors or orientation and gender identity. And we're like, whatever we can fight about, that's what it is. When that's not what it's about at all. I mean, yes, it is about those components, but it's about intimacy, sensuality, our health, the way our bodies change from birth till death. We don't just have like one form of puberty that happens, like our bodies are changing all the time. Our sexuality is part of that. But our sexuality is also part of how we show up as the embodied beings in relationship with others. And so I think having, like, in what form of social spaces do we get to bring our whole sexuality in a way that's affirmed? And then we're going to expect that somehow we're going to show up with generative AI and it's going to be able to do that. So I think it's better for us to think about it as we critique generative AI. Where are the places, like what aspects of our sexuality is it trying to engage with, as opposed to reducing our worldview to that actually equaling how we think about our sexuality. The other thing I want to say about sexuality is that, yes, we all have one, but it's also a thing, right? And we both because of the church's history in all that we do, but also because of the way we have legislated and legalized certain aspects of sexuality, has become so privatized that part of the problem is when we read that data about who's using chatbots, I'm sure most of you in here were like, no, nobody I know. And I'm sorry, but that's the same kind of thing if I were to tell you that 1 in 4 on some campuses, 1 in 3 female-identified folks are going to suffer sexual violence while they're here, right? It's because it's become privatized. We don't want to see it, and we don't want to have to deal with it. But those are social issues we all have a responsibility for. So promoting sexual health and flourishing is all of our responsibility. Sorry, I got on a soapbox.
No. Snap. Okay, so. But that's what I was going to do. That's what I was going to do.
That was a big
And I was
sigh,
going to tie it
Brianne.
in with, I'll try and tie it in with faith a little bit, actually, because we were talking about that. I think my core conviction, coming at this from a theological perspective, or actually, let me back up. Let me do it a different way. I think it is really interesting. Sometimes I have a class on relationships and sexuality. And I'll often start off the class by asking a question, which is just, who are you? Like, say something about yourself. And what's interesting is students will almost, apply some kind of like very interesting adjective about themselves. Like I'm on this, I'm sporty, or, like I do this or I do that. And what I point out to them is that in most cultures, if you ask the question, who are you? You will get a relational answer. I am so-and-so's children. I am a part of such and this family. I'm a part of this community, right? And so thinking about from the faith aspect, and I think, let me finish my thought there. What I want students to get out of that class is a sense of who they are that is about who they're in relationship with as an expression of who they truly are. Like the relationships that we have ultimately form who we are. And then in the Christian context I was getting to, that ultimately is how we have a relationship with God. How we have relationships with other people is our relationship with God. Karl Rahner, one of my favorite theologians, talks about this pretty explicitly, where he tries to say, like, love of neighbor is love of God, and love of God is love of neighbor. You can't distinguish between those things.
And love of self.
Right. But I would say, like, love of self really is about, like, understanding yourself as worthy of relationships with, love of self can't happen alone. It happens first in a community that affirms how deeply you're worth being loved, right? That's why our DEI centers are really important on college campuses, because to love yourself alone is not possible. You need a community around you that affirms that you're worth being loved. So love of self is important, but it happens in community, right? And then, right, like loving, to love others, right, is to be in community, and through that to love God. So all of that, like, so for me, the faith perspective is, and I'm not trying to say this in a way where, like, this is the ultimate thing that's at stake, but I think it's a really relevant question, is like, how do we have a relationship with God? How do we have a relationship with what is ultimately important, if you want to just put it that way, with your ultimate sense of meaning, if you're closed off from relationships with other people because you're online all the time? And like, I understand that, like, and when I say online, I guess I mean very specifically not talking with people, but talking with chatbots. And we can talk about all the positives of chatbots. I don't think that, like, an informative chatbot is a bad way to get, like, a bad medium for getting information necessarily, but when it becomes the primary mode of relationship, I wonder about how that shapes sense of self. Like, I was like, who are you, right? Sense of self, sense of community, loving other people, and loving God. Like, how do we do that? So a little bit more I could say on that, but I think that's how I would, I don't know if that defines relationships, but the way I see faith and relationship being quite connected.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I want to add in addition to that is that I think oftentimes, so that also helps us see love and relationship together and as encounters. And I often, I mean, I absolutely love the greatest commandment and think about that all the time. But I think from an ethics perspective, as we're thinking about our relationships, that's a big like love, right? It's hard, I think, sometimes for people to see that and to really be able to define it. So I would also ask everyone here just to think about like, what are the values for you that comprise what you would say, oh, that's love, right? And it doesn't, I also think we should just do away with, this is my own opinion, the Christian tradition's differences between eros, philia, and what am I missing? Agape, thanks, you pick one. I think we should just totally move away from the distinction of those. They're arbitrary, and I think it creates a hierarchy in ways that don't mean for us all relationships contribute. And so instead it creates this hierarchy. So I also want to say, love, not just these values, but also for us to recognize that it includes various kinds of desires, feelings, and then also the values. So there's a way in which you have to have an embodiedness to experience all those things. And so, I mean, this will be one of my like, what I already said it before of like, we have to know a chatbot's a chatbot, that it's not a human. But also that means, you know, as many other people have said, it shouldn't say I love you. Because if this is how we're defining love, it doesn't. It can stand in and serve as someone for you to reflect with, maybe, but it can't do the practice that we are talking about.
I think that's a great place to open it up to questions. Oh, we've got 1, 2, and 3. Thomas, you got to run. Oh, Dr. Lambert's helping too. Whoever gets there first. All right, Will, hit us with your question.
Hello there. So I had a really good mama growing up, and still now she's still here. Whenever I talk to a chat bot online, or a big model like ChatGPT or Claude, my prompts, I always have please and thank you in them. Is even doing that a little too far in your opinions, or is that like the right level?
Okay, so I'll say what I think about this in particular. So I actually think there are a variety of uses of chatbots, even in the realm of therapy, friendship, companionship, that so long as there were like some clear, you know, maybe even like you can only use it for this long, right? Or I was going to use guardrails. We've been talking about that all day. So I was trying to find other words. I actually think like there are so many people who don't have basic sex education. Like, would that not be a great place to use a chatbot in a way that could provide really holistic information, but also you would be practicing communication as you were learning, right? Great use for it. Should you say please and thank you? Yes. So this is where we differ a little bit in the sense that I do think I have a more robust sort of understanding of relationship in the sense that like I think you can have a relationship with a tree, with pets and animals, yeah. But I also think they're morally formative. And I think it's true about chatbots too. I think you can, that I would define it as a relationship in the sense that I am encountering otherness, and that otherness is requiring my expansion. And so when I am morally formed and expanding in that encounter, I want to say, you should use please and thank you, right? If you, Kate Devlin writes about this in her book on sex robots, and Kate Darling writes about it in her book on how we treat animals and robots. That really this is more about how we're being formed. And so I would, and honestly, some of the tech is designed to respond to you differently. Like Alexa is actually designed to respond to you differently if you're polite. I don't think that's a bad thing. On the other hand, I do think gendering her as this like female assistant that you should be polite to is probably ongoingly problematic. But
Can I add something real quick? I'm curious what you think of this, because I absolutely don't want to lift human relationality up to some kind of apex of generativity that doesn't include like the dynamism of a forest or experience of that, or the ways that people are taken care of by their pets and all these different things. I guess what's interesting to me is I grapple with this. So this is me, a curious, open person who may not have it all figured out. I think of, I mean, it's a technology, which means a tool, and what that means is that it's an extension of us. And so I don't see it as an other or a thou in the same way that I would be willing to bestow like thou-ness on a tree or a plant. And I think, I was thinking about it this morning. I think this is a worthy thing to bring up right now, because you were talking about the designer babies. And I was just thinking about how worthwhile it is for us not to have designer babies, precisely because of that encounter with the unknown, with people who you have, you know, the encounter with people who are neurodivergent or are just different than you on any number of axes, and require you to have, like, just like you said, a bigger, more capacious view of the world because of that encounter. And I guess I would contend that I'm not sure that we get that kind of ask into being larger from an LLM. Like, it can give us new information, but I don't know that I feel like it gives us that, like, infinity that is the openness that is another person.
yeah, just quick. So I think the difference here is that I'm not locating it in the thing. I'm actually locating it in the experience, in the interaction. And that's also, I mean, that radically changes like an I-thou kind of theology too, to say it is actually, it's not about the things, or it's just about the interaction. So, yeah.
You can use please and thank you. It just weights your answer differently. That's what you're doing. It's a weight situation. You're weighting your answer differently. That's all you're doing.
Well,
But you want to be a polite person going forward.
yeah. But did you, I looked at Will and I said, did you think your please and thank you question, you know, would prompt such a complex response? But it is the heart of the matter, right? In a lot of ways. And we are all grapplers at this moment. All right, who else wanted to ask a question? Yes, oh, you're already ready already.
I'm so glad that you asked this question. I feel like it leads really well into what I was thinking about as well, which, you know, as we've talked about, humans have a long history of relationships with all kinds of other than human entities that we take up in all different ways, sometimes very respectful, sometimes less so. And a lot of that sort of weights on this question of, is this other a person, right? Is this other somebody that I am sort of accountable to? And I guess one of the things that I've been kind of chewing on, I'm in the psychology department, and so thinking a lot about sort of attachment relationships and what they do with us. What are going to be the relational consequences over time of constantly having to make these distinctions between you are an entity that I owe this consideration to and you are not? So all this stuff that comes up like, well, it doesn't have a consciousness, it shouldn't say I love you. You know, that like these are sort of discriminations that we are going to need to like be doing on such a regular basis. And I wonder, what it will do for us to be so often in relation to those that we don't know if we owe a please or a thank you to. So I've just been sort of fretting about that a lot, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are, and also just what research you've come across on that topic, because I'm just starting to look into it now.
I think you were I liked what you were saying about how, like, we owe it to ourselves to be comporting ourselves in that way toward all at all times. And I think that that's a sort of good, like a thoughtful response in both of those.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think it's more about our formation. I'm less worried about can you distinguish between the things and like just be kind to everything, right? That should be your starting point. In addition to that, I think there's, earlier this morning I noted like some of the work that's going on at SCAS at the Yale Robotics Lab, where they're working with children and help, like, the children know it's a robot, like it's a squishy little thing, or it's a dinosaur, or, you know, so they're not trying to make it something it's not, but they also feel like they have a good relationship with it. And they're able to talk and communicate in a way that they can't in other social circumstances, either with other kids or other adults. And that practice makes them better communicators. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, we can decide what we think about this particular experiment later, but like Real Doll X gave a good population of young men who felt as though they had severe social anxiety talking to women. Just the doll's head, not the whole doll, just the doll's head with like a LLM like voice box in it. And they had to have daily conversations. Their communication skills and anxiety level talking to people of a different gender, way better after this work with them. Again, I don't think that was, I don't think it's a huge lift for them to be like, it's not the same as a woman in front of me. But this practice makes a difference. So I don't know that I'm fully answering your question, but that gives you a couple of places where people are kind of trying this out and seeing what happens with it. It also happens a lot in VR games, especially serious games, which we know that because of both haptic response and your like substantive feeling of embodiment based on volume in a VR space, that we can reduce stereotypes using serious games in VR. You can increase people's sense of like self-confidence and empowerment. And it can be it doesn't even have to be like fighting poverty in a serious game. It can be, you just slayed a dragon, but you feel better about going to class because like you slayed that dragon. And you might ask a question in class today. So those are a few varieties of sort of interactive ways that I think various forms of this technology can be socially and educationally helpful.
Can I go for something real quick? I'm sorry. I would say that I worry more about attachment starvation in a world where so many of the relationships that we're giving to children and young adults and older folks to everyone are not with people. And so like we can worry about how do we tell the difference and I think that you're exactly right, and how to worry about that problem. But are we backfilling with actual relationships? Do we have families where everybody's working so much that no one actually gets to spend, and we put the phones away and we spend the open sort of senseless, in the sense of like, I'm not trying to teach my child something, I'm not trying to enrich them, I'm just giving them my time, I'm giving them my attention. And that, I think, and then, I think this is why people really do turn to a lot of this stuff, because of the attachment starvation. So I think that the second part of this conversation has to do with attention and the attention that we're giving people. It's like you can give people all of these tools, and I think they're excellent, and people need human attention. Full stop.
Yeah, let's hit this side of the room.
Thank you. This has been fascinating so far. Thank you, guys. My question is a good segue into what I've been thinking, kind of like an amalgamation of everything we've been talking about so far. To me, one of the ultimate goals of all of this is to avoid the anthropomorphization aspect of tech and AI, right? Like saying thank you is all well and good, right? Using this for children is all well and good. I'm old enough to remember like 15, 20 years ago, my dad had one of those little GPS things you brought to the car, type in your address, Garmin, and he named it Isabella. And so he's like, oh, we can't leave the house without Isabella. And I'm like, Dad, that's weird, what? And so this is reminding me of all this. We're humanizing these things that are not human. And then it has drastically good or bad consequences, right? There's the example of the 14-year-old kid in Florida that created a chatbot named after Daenerys Targaryen, I think, but he made it as his sister or whatever. Long story short, he said, I will see you soon, and he killed himself to be, hypothetically, with that chatbot. So there's a very fine line to humanness and non-humanness and all that within the AI world and chatbots. So I guess how do we avoid that dangerous humanization of AI, if at all?
to me, I'm just going to kind of loop back into my previous answer, which is I think when people have secure attachment, like but when people have a lot of secure human, like whether plants, yes, but pets, nature, life, family, friends, when they have a lot of secure attachment in their life, it's fun. I mean, and this is a positive thing for people to do in jest when you know it's not human. I mean, I know like a lot of friends who use like mobility devices will often name them, like there's lots of, like, that's fine, that's fun. I don't think there's a problem there. I think the problem comes when it becomes a substitute for human attachment. That I think is the issue.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we should always be talking about additive rather than replacing. And yet, I mean, I do get, so I want to say it should always be additive and not replacement. And we live in a broken world. I also think we have like one-offs where things go really, really bad. I mean, like Transluce found OpenAI's, new launch of their model 1 model ago could be tricked into giving directions for suicide. They gave it to OpenAI and said, like, look, we already found it for you. And they were like, launch is in process. So, the folks at Transluce are continuing to work on these kinds of problems. They're a great organization. You can look them up. So those problems are going to keep happening. Do we live in a world where we're going to say it should all go away? We could say that. It's not going to. And we also live in a world where, like, I know from my folks who are coming into church ministry that, like, they grew up in a rural place where nobody affirmed their queerness and, like, had attempts at suicide and almost didn't get out. If they could have some online relationship where someone affirmed who they were, like, that could be the difference in their day. And I'm okay with that. So I just think on the balance, in my chapter on sex robots, which they're not here and they're not any good at this point, but they will be. I wonder about the person who really wants that kind of physical relationship, and because of the way our society is structured, is never gonna get it. Like, I don't wanna fault that one person for that. Do I wanna fault the industry for the way they stereotypically, racially gender these kinds of products that they make? Yes, I wanna hold them accountable for that. Do I wanna hold our society, and me specifically, our churches accountable for the fact that we are not showing up and filling the gap in a positive way of this lack of social attachment? Yeah. And so I'd rather spend my energy trying to push us in those directions.
Right back here.
Hi, so I have a particular interest in this topic. I did a pretty extensive research project on AI sex bots for Duquesne, and it's funny that you mentioned that because my question has to do with it. So I'm sure you're familiar with the company Realbotics in LA. For those of you that don't know, they make like highly specialized sex bots. You can customize pretty much anything. The most basic model starts at $20,000, and the most expensive model starts at $125,000. So with these bots and even the chatbots that we're seeing, there seems to be like a lack of pushback and a lack of resistance because you can program it to do whatever you want. So there's not going to be that kind of pushback that you get in a relationship where they don't answer you for 6 hours and you're freaking out, or they're not responding to you in the exact way that you want, or they're with their ex. So with this lack of resistance and lack of conflict, I think about how conflict inherently forms who we are and how we respond to resistance that informs who we are as people. And I'm wondering what you guys think about how this lack of resistance can possibly do damage to how the individual interacting with AI perceives interpersonal relationships and how they are then confined to a certain identity without resistance.
Okay, I have a couple things I want to say. I was trying to find one thing. Yeah, I agree. I think that's true of the chatbots too, like this rejection-free joy character I created. Now, it didn't reject me, but it did resist the directions I was trying to go. So there was like negotiation happening. That would be different if it was one of the sex bots from real DocX. At the very least, I do think when we engage in these questions, we should, this is, from a social ethics perspective, actually find the people who are like part of this. And there is a whole sextile community prior to any AI or anything, right? There's just, and they talk very complexly about relationship. And none of them are sequestered with like most of them are girlfriends, but right, with their girlfriends. They go to work, they have friends, they go out, they have fun, right? But this is their choice for how they are engaging in terms of a particular aspect of living out their sexuality in the world. So I do think we can learn something from them and how complexly they've thought about it. And they actually have a lot of critique around the kind of like whether or not to create like voice generation and engagement in the dolls. So I think that's an interesting, like, let's not alienate a whole population that actually has some experience here we could maybe learn from, whether we agree with it or not. The other piece that I think about this is both religious and cultural. I think we're gonna denigrate anything that feels like it's not some sort of high-level form of mutuality and reciprocity in relationship. And so this is just whenever I'm asking questions about what the tech is doing, I'm always asking what's going on with humans. And I'm sorry, but we have really crappy, can I say crappy?
You can say crappy.
Okay.
You said
Okay, we have really crappy relationships, right? I think for the most part, we're not good at sexual and romantic relationships well, right? Most of them are not mutual or reciprocal, right? So we kind of hold this standard out for tech forms that we don't hold ourselves to in real life. And it's often why people are going to those forms. So I think that's a piece of it. The third piece I will say is that, again, I already said, I wish there was a world where people didn't feel the need to fulfill their sexuality in that particular regard, because I think there are other ways it could be fulfilled really robustly. But we live in a broken world. So the third thing I will say is that I also think we have a hard time thinking about any of this, even like VR relationships where people engage in sexual behaviors, because we just don't even know how to think about masturbation as something that is a human good, right? It educates about ourselves. It actually has all this data on how it's good for our health, and that it is an expression of our sexuality, right? And so I actually think we want to like dress it up more in these other kinds of forms to be like, that's okay. I can express my desire and pleasure this way. And no, they're not going to call that masturbation. It is, right? Because that's just a giant sex toy. So those are a few things. Go ahead.
That's great. No, I think that's great. And I think that like I am a theologian, not an ethicist, but something that I find helpful for myself when thinking through things ethically is rather than to look, for example, specifically at this community, say like, well, what is sort of wrong always, right? And it's like and I think it's a really good point about like seeking out the community and hearing from them. This is something I have not researched and do not know anything about. But I have, because of my thinking on like sexuality and consent, learned more about the BDSM community and learned a lot about consent from them, right? So there probably is a lot there to learn. And in all of these circumstances, if the whole thing is there so that you can not say please and thank you, right? But instead be really violent, like I think that always is bad, right? And I do think there is, there's clearly, I think one thing to care about right now, particularly, at the college age, what a lot of people are dealing with, but particularly people being interested in relationships with men, is a population that seems to be more enculturated into violence. I mean, I don't know, maybe that's not true, maybe it's always been that way, but like it just seems, I get, like I hear from a lot of my students that it just feels really difficult out there because so many heterosexual men in particular seem to expect a lot of violence from their relationships, and they're learning this from stuff out there. So to map all of that onto the particular sex robot scene is, I think you're saying that's what's too much, and I think that is a really insightful bit of research. And I think that concern of some of these things having an effect, right? And seeing the ways in which having I think you're exactly right in terms of we need, like you were saying, these are folks with friends, people who tell you when you're being a jerk, people who tell you when you smell, people who tell you when you're being racist. Like those are people I have needed in my life. And if I was just the same person I was when I was 11, because no one ever told me that I needed to be better and do better, that would be a really big problem. And that's a sort of a thing I worry about as well developmentally. It's just if you consistently have relationships with chatbots who are programmed to be sycophantic, you are so brilliant and so hot. It's like, well, like that's gonna be great, but like what about like the times I've hurt my husband's feelings? Those have been really, really important. What about the times when I had to learn to tell him that he had hurt my feelings and how hard that was, right? Like those are so fundamental, and we have to have those. And I think your point is like we don't need to sort of demonize this group as a way to talk about these problems, because they're a problem everywhere. They're a problem in married straight couples have been together for 30 years, and it's a problem in every other kind of relationship. My point is, it's always a problem, no matter the community, right? And I feel, and just to go back to the place I started, I do feel when I hear from my students that it is hard to begin these conversations in romantic relationships right now. And it feels like there's an effect of all of this discourse, like the effect of like men in particular, but probably both, like just who've been really enculturated into a more domineering way of seeing relationships. It's hard.
I'm sure we have 8 million more questions. We don't have that many minutes. I do want to say, ooh, it is getting hot up here. I need to say, Dr. Ott was like, can I say crappy? And then she went full into talking about masturbation.
That's not a swear word.
Without hesitation. Is crappy?
I was going to say a different word.
Oh, got it. Just to kind of wrap it up, could we do like quick takeaway? And then hopefully we will continue this conversation. You know how people love to say that. But I do hope that we can do that. Dr. Ott and then Dr. Jacobs.
Yeah, all right. If I can leave us with anything, it's that we are sexual people, and we are not sexual people in a vacuum. All of what we have talked about is a much larger issue than whether it just relates to chatbots or any kinds of forms of technology. And if we can start there, I think that really helps us. If we can push back against the individualized, privatized formation of sexuality that we promote, but generative AI definitely promotes. And so how do we break that open? And if we do break that open, if I have a word for any of the kind of designer or engineer folks, like meet some sexuality educators, make sure they're part of what you're doing when you're designing this stuff. It actually is gonna be better and be used better. And then that goes to what we've been talking about the whole conference, which is if we can shift to thinking about generative AI not as this replacement, but as this addition, as something that can walk with us, that can educate us, that can help us with communication, any of those kinds of things, then I think it will contribute to our sexual flourishing. But if it is not in that direction, I think it's gonna probably harm us indelibly.
I don't know if I have any like wrap up thoughts. I don't know. I'm just so grateful to be having this conversation, and I guess if I had anything to say, it's just like I am trying to do this. Try to spend time with people in just the most open way. Children, possible romantic partners, friends, family members. I feel like this is where it collapses in on some of our ways of quantifying our worth in terms of, grades and success and all of these things. Learning, we're always learning new things, we're always achieving things, all these things that we've really instrumentalized our human relationships. Sort of turning people into tech around us, like turning the people into the instruments of our own betterment or popularity or whatever. And I'm really trying to orient myself to my human relationships as just, you know, the religious would be like apophatic, like an open an open sense of possibility that I'm just present to. Yeah, as kind of whatever as the inverse of this. So I guess that would be my.
No, fantastic. Thank you both. Can we please, for our panelists? I'm so glad we were able to bring this topic to the symposium and have you all share your expertise and